Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of StreamYard Spotlight. I am co-host Dana Bentz.
And I'm co-host Kelsey Bentz. Thanks so much for tuning in, y'all.
I know, thanks for being here. We've got another great episode of the StreamYard Spotlight. And for those of you who are new here, we do these shows every single week, every Thursday, with a new member of our StreamYard community. And the title of the show is exactly the point. So we want to spotlight a new member in the StreamYard community who's using StreamYard in a really unique way or a really cool way, producing neat shows. So that's what we have for you tonight. So let us know where you're tuning in from in the comments. We always like to see that, but we will just jump right into our guest today. So Flobo's joining us, and we're really excited to learn from him about his style of shows. So he has a lot of different shows on StreamYard. I know a lot of people will only have, one show. Like we have one show that's the StreamYard Spotlight. Hey, Diego, thanks for tuning in. But managing several shows can be tough. But so we'll hear from Flobo in just a minute. So if you have any questions at all for our guest at any time, leave them in the comments, and we would love to show them on screen. But without further ado, Flobo, welcome to the show.
Hi, Flobo.
Wow, what a welcome. Thank you so much. I am an advocate of StreamYard, and this is the perfect time for this. I know the invitation to me is an honor, and I'm so glad to be part of the show today.
Aw, thank you so much. We're so happy to have you. I'm very curious to learn about your show, to hear more, to hear about all your shows. So can you first give like a brief overview of who you are,
Sure.
and then an in-depth overview of how you're using StreamYard?
So I like to call myself an urban polymath. I get myself involved in a bunch of things. It was stand-up comedy was really my main entertainment pursuit. But during the years of that, I grew into master ceremonies and DJing and stuff like that. So what I like about StreamYard was I can definitely use different aspects what I'm good at. So like I'm a big wrestling fan, but how do I mix wrestling and comedy? My wrestling and comedy show uses StreamYard. Or I'm a big fan of Star Trek and comedy mixes with that. So I always tell people at parties that I am a jack of all trades and a master of a few, maybe?
Master of a few. I love that. So you really made a show for every single one of your interests and hobbies.
Yeah,
That's what it sounds like.
It is funny because there's certain cases where I love one specific show, like Star Trek, Discovery. And so I have like a little bit of an unofficial post show where we have more of a lighthearted take of what's happening, because science fiction fans can be very serious about things, but we're kind of loosey-goosey with that. And wrestling is also a weekly show what I love a lot. I'm a big wrestling fan, been that way since I was a kid. I'm a nerd, I get it. But for me as a comedian, the big dream, if I can say so, is to have my own late night variety show, not like necessarily a talk show, but more like variety. Flip Wilson, Cedric Entertainer Presents, some Live It Tonight show in there. And so to do that, especially now in 2020 when we've gone virtual, StreamYard allows me to do that also as well. So I have a wrestling show, a Star Trek show, I do a late night talk comedy interview show, I have one where I review Netflix movies called Flobo Shows on Netflix, and all of those are powered by StreamYard.
Oh my
Wow.
gosh, that's a lot to manage.
Yeah.
So
It's so much fun.
how many shows did you have before using StreamYard? Or was it really the discovery of StreamYard that sort of like opened your horizons to adding more shows?
It's a good question because it's hard to say that with the pandemic and all that. And a little bit of a backstory. I used to be doing after shows at a digital network, but during the pandemic, it was on hiatus. So my podcast, I would say I had beforehand. It's called New Amsterdam Radio, KNEW Amsterdam Radio, where I would sit with creatives and ask them how and why. That was on a separate podcast app. But I think that was the only legacy show. When I did start going things virtually or being stuck into my house with the pandemic, so I started launching these after shows. But the reason why I bring up New Amsterdam is that StreamYard makes things so much easier to give someone a single login link without trying to inform them how to download a separate app or give them a wall of text and call-in numbers. I've shifted my podcast strategy to StreamYard as well. So even though New Amsterdam is a little older, I would say that's the only one that was around beforehand. But everything else, I would say the oldest show was as of April 2020. But it's rocking and rolling.
Wow, that's so cool to hear. And specifically with the podcast as well, because, obviously StreamYard is not just a podcasting platform, but, we have the ability to, download that MP3 audio file and send that to your podcasting platform. So that's really awesome that you're able to, StreamYard to use on your podcast as well.
I'll take that one step further. For those of us who are doing this strategy, I like to have my audio version for no cost for my regular fans. But if you are a member of my Patreon, you get the bonus of having the video. Because what's cool about StreamYard, you can totally do both at the same time. So it's kind of like an incentive to become a patron at patreon.com/Flobo Boyce. Got the little plug in.
I love that. Okay, so for our audience members who don't know what Patreon is, can you share a little bit more about how you're doing that, what Patreon does for you, and what they get extra, that perk you mentioned?
So live entertainment is basically my life work, and it was deemed non-essential. So Patreon's been a help and being able to outline the content you create over a monthly subscription. So a fan who's really into what I can do can be a member of my Patreon. That's what they call them. You're a patron. And as a creator, sometimes we struggle with how do we add value? How do we maintain value? You don't want to work for a Patreon, but you want it to build a community there too. So my podcasts were still going. New Amsterdam Radio is about 2 years old, 2.5 years old. So the audio versions are for anyone that has a podcasting app, Apple Podcast or Spotify. But for a little bonus, I do the unabridged interviews video style as Patreon, a paywall. So if you want to see the interactions, if you want to have bonus questions answered with the same guests of the same show, it's like a value add to be into the Patreon.
Interesting. That's
a really
clever.
Cool way to use that. Yeah.
Super clever. Because I know a lot of people, once you start streaming and get better at streaming, become more of an expert in live streaming, you want to take the next step to get monetized or to,
Right.
And I think most people will think about the social media platforms, like, how do I get to monetization level on YouTube? Or how do I get enough followers for Twitch to turn on monetization? But Patreon seems like such a great way to go. And I love your tip of like, you still want to get the maximum reach with the podcast. So that's free. Anyone gets it. But like, if you want that extra little boost, you get the full version. You get the whole StreamYard stream instead of just the audio.
Well, the best content play is always a two-pronged attack, right? If you're a giant pop star, music on the radio is free, but theoretically, if there were a concert, you will pay for a concert ticket, right? So why not bring that to your own content as well?
Yep. Oh, love it. Great idea. Yeah. I don't know if we've had anyone on our show who's been a Patreon, what do they call it? A Patreon user, maybe?
I think so, a creator or something like that.
Yeah, I think so. So I want to talk about how you're organizing everything. Like, how are you keeping everything separate? Do you use the StreamYard brand folders?
Absolutely.
I was hoping you'd say that.
So there's so many versions of me. I could be sad, I could be NPR, I could be happy, but there's a little bit of a limit to my range, right? I am Flobo Boyce. That's just the way I am. The brands help to give you a little bit more of an essence for each show. So Flobos on Netflix, it's red. I can tell I have my little lamp there. I make the lamp red to have a little bit more of a thing. We get more critical thinking, a little bit more thought. What's Up Flobo After Hours? I have a different background. It's a blue and orange color scheme. I have a specific intro in that brand folder, so I can always switch between which brand I'm using it for. And New Amsterdam Radio, just to round it all out, has like a cityscape background because it's named after the city of New York, which was called New Amsterdam at one point. So it has a bit of more cosmopolitan feel. So a guest, and sometimes you have a guest for one show, doesn't necessarily exclude them from being on another show, but you want to make sure that guest has a different look and feel when they're on a particular show,
Yeah.
Good point.
That's
great. So interesting. We built those brand folders for someone exactly like you who wants
thanks.
For some, you need to have separate brands for each of your shows. Like, they need to have a different feel. And I love that you described even your light in the background, making that red, changes the whole vibe of the show. And Kelsey and I just both pretty recently, maybe a few months ago, got lights in our background, and we love changing them. We have them blue for the spotlight, and then Kelsey has her show where she turns it a pinkish, orangish red for the Avenue A show.
Yeah.
Like it's such a good tip. Like it does change your branding. It changes the feel when you change the brand.
Absolutely, yeah. And sometimes you could do it also to go alongside things. So the wrestling show I cover, for those of you who are wrestling fans, it's called NXT. That show itself lies heavily on a goldenrod kind of color, much like the background here. So even though we do that show during the day where the light's not good, like the background around the host of the show or that goldenrod color, our thumbnails we put on our YouTube photos, that same thing. So it kind of, I know branding is something we say kind of flippantly, oh, what's my brand? But a look and a feel, an aesthetic is very, very important. People want to know what they're getting. I go back to like McDonald's, right? Which I'm not judging anyone who goes all the time or doesn't go at all, but you know, a Big Mac in Des Moines will taste the same way as a Big Mac in London. Why is that? Consistency, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and predictability in that way too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But for each different one.
Yeah.
Right.
Makes sense. It's not the same every single time. So my question for you, my personal question, is how are you able to come up with this much content? And do you ever run out of content?
Well, it depends on the show. So like the after shows, the content's given to you. That's kind of much, hey, we're doing a recap of the TV shows. Let's do it.
Nice.
So that's those are kind of easier. The late night talk show, I take an extra step to write. So I have an interview, I have my questions, I do keep a notepad of my notes. And I can tell you, I mean, for all those who are listening now that want to do a weekly podcast on some sort of clockwork, it is a challenge to book your guests and to keep it engaging every week without falling into cliches. So here's my 7 questions. See you next week. That is definitely part of the game, but I do think that if this is what you really want to do, if you really want to have live experiences, your audience wants to see you grow as well. So take that challenge, ask that person you think they're going to turn you down, like the junior prom. Like, we want to be in my podcast. Ask them different questions. And the thing is, it's been such a growth thing for me because, again, my entertainment trade was stand-up comedy. And I love hearing the crowd, but there were no crowds. So for me, the challenge of, I have this guest from this walk of life. How can I make this not only engaging for me as a host, but for my audience who tunes in to see me, has been the seed I need to keep moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you think the virtual hybrid will change as you're able to go back into your recording studio, being a comedian on stage, like back to
I was wondering this too. Yeah.
Back to your live audience. What does that world look like?
Yeah, I try to look at other things too to see how I can compare it because this is it was true what they say. It is unprecedented times, right?
Yeah.
But I go back to the diversion of books. So books were print for a long time, and now you can get an e-reader and be fine. You can read things on your phone. There's going to be people that prefer one or the other, and I think some people have a combination of both. I still give physical books out as gifts, but if I'm buying a book myself, I'll download. So I will say comedy clubs will come back. You'll have more of the social distance shows or even smaller venues, especially maybe even go back to being a normal thing with people, the vaccine takes hold. But I'm not trying to discount virtual experiences. I remember in the early days of my podcast taking a mixer to someone's basement and setting up microphones. It is so easier now to be like, click this link, bro. Let me know when you're ready, and we'll have a show, right?
Yeah, join on your phone if you need to.
Perfect.
Right.
That is so funny. It's so really true. Like that used to be how you did it. Or even if you did it online with someone in a different state, like you got to set up OBS and then that you call them in with Skype or like all that. And they have to set up all their stuff on their end. But literally all it is now is a link and that's it.
Well, and I love how you talk about the book metaphor because I think I've been thinking a lot about this too as I'm in the arts world and I'm a performer, and so I've been thinking like, okay, what's going to happen now with this virtual state that we've all sort of mastered at this point? What's going to happen when things move back in person? Like, how are we going to combine that? But I love that metaphor, about how you still read physical books and some people still prefer that, and that's still an option. But there's also these other options now that we've all embraced and they all kind of coexist. So I like that way of thinking about the future of live versus virtual, right?
Sure.
Cross fingers,
Yeah. Makes sense.
We're all creatives.
Can you talk about, you mentioned this just briefly, how you invite your guests on and maybe the worst they can say is no. It's kind of like asking someone to prom. Sure. What's your process for inviting guests on to your shows? The ones that have, the shows you have that do include a guest?
So I do have multiple shows, not to brag, but there's different strategies for things. So for the after shows, you're dealing a lot more with celebrities, the people on the show, the costume designers, the big wigs, if you will. So you got to pray and spray and pray, as they say. Not to say that they're going to say no, but for whatever reason they may say no. You're a new platform. They never heard of you. You're not in a major outlet. They can't do things without having clearance from a PR. Get that thick skin and learn to be rejected, because once you get over that, you're like, okay, on Monday I'm sending out 10 emails, and if 2 say yes, that's great. If 5 say yes, I have an abundance of riches, and if they all say no, then I can ask 10 more. When you're doing a lot more intimate things, when you have, like, let's say you're doing a medical show, or you're doing a show about mental health, and you know someone specifically, a lot of people, which I've come to realize more than ever, want their stories told. And they're willing to not only say yes, but willing to work with you to say, I'm trying out this new platform called StreamYard. Can you bear with me? Yeah, sure. Okay. And that's the fear that you can get over pretty quickly. So a lot of my show, my New Amsterdam radio show, my first, I would say 15 guests were my friends, or people I knew from one degree apart. It was like, I'm doing this thing. I don't even promote it. It's kind of lame. I talk about creative people and how they do things and their strategies. You want to be on it. And they said yes. Now I'm at the point where I feel confident enough in the work, because I've grown myself, to go, hey, someone I saw with 20,000 followers, hey, give me a shot.
Yeah. Well, and you never got to the platform you've built now without starting with those episodes. Like, I think that's what some people forget. Is like, now you've built this, you have all these shows, and you can tell in your ask to a future guest, you could be like, look at my resume of all these shows, and they can watch, they can like see you in action. But you did all those shows right in the beginning with the people you knew, with some of your friends. Like, that's such a great way to start. Like, start where you're comfortable, and then work up to, the celebrities, like you said.
In my opinion, the magic number is 8. If you could do 8 episodes of your show and get through the grind of, oh, no one's watching this, I'm not being famous, I think that's when you start to say, okay, this is what it is. Because let's be honest with you, every time you do an episode of your show, unless you somehow book a Kardashian, right, you are laying a single brick and saying, why is there one in my hotel? Give me a shot. So I know things are hard. You may have day jobs, you may have kids, you may have other responsibilities. But if it's something you're really passionate about, something you really care about, it's going to take time to say, brick by brick, I'm going to try this. You're going to get again. Yeah. I'll give you an example. I know this is a very specific example. I do my wrestling show. I comment on a WWE show called NXT I mentioned before. It's hard to get guests for whatever reason. This is a giant company. WWE's been around for like 80 years. This week, I got one of the ring announcers or commentators for the UK brand on my show, Draped in Gold, drapedingold.com. Wow. Check it out. And it was because, hey, no one else is covering this show on this network. You are. I've stumbled across it. I'll give you a shot. Now, if I did 2 episodes and go, no one's coming on my show, forget it. He wouldn't have said yes, because I wouldn't have a track record. That's actually right. It's a credit, right? It's more important to have a track record to get those big guests.
That is such good advice.
Even if the track record is less known people, right? I think that's the important thing, is just that you have those abundance of episodes that you can be like, hey, person, I've done this, and you might not recognize any of the guests, but like, it's a thing, it's an entity, that you have to show for yourself.
Yeah. And people
Mark is absolutely right.
People are in the comments, they're saying, yes, totally, great advice. Rob says, I needed to hear that.
Hey, Rob, keep on doing, man. You're doing the most important thing. Every society needs a culture, and you're a part of that.
So. Love that.
Flobo, you have such an amazing outlook. Sorry to interrupt. But your energy really is so lovely, and the way that you seem to think about this sort of stuff is very inspiring.
I appreciate that. There's a lot of dark days there too, but I'm saying this. I've entertained for 15 years. But when I sat there in April of 2020, having my job basically say, you're good, and looking for an online application, and there are many. StreamYard is not in a bubble. There's other apps out there, and I sat there and I was like, okay, if I really want to do this, do I care enough to do this? What would happen if I said no and sat on my couch?
Yeah,
I would be on my couch. If I
Right.
did this and failed, if I upgraded to the HD package, because there are tiers of StreamYard, spoiler alert, if I did it and it worked out and I had content to my name, then why not? And it's really been, once you get rid of the fear, once you give yourself to your project, it's a lot more liberating to say I'm going for it. So thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you, Flobo. This has been so much action-packed content squished into our 20-minute little, snippet. But I've already taken away so many tips from you and things I could share in the StreamYard community. I love your how you're using Patreon for your users and splitting up the audio, and the paid members get the video content. I think that's so smart. So thank you for being on our show and taking the time to give your tips.
It was an honor, for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So everyone can subscribe to you. So we have your Patreon down below, but where can they watch your...
YouTube.com/Flobo Boyce. My comedy show airs every Monday night at 10 p.m. Pacific live. The wrestling show's every Thursday at 1 p.m. live. But all the stuff is archived on YouTube. YouTube.com/Flobo Boyce. And if you just want to see all the shows I'm working on at a glance, newamsterdam.com. That's KNEW. Amsterdam.com. It's all the shows are listed. You can see which one you like.
KNEW. Oh,
Yeah.
People must make that typo.
Oh, well, yeah, because, when I started, it is a funny story. So New Amsterdam was about selling notebooks. The reason being, as a comedian, all of my comic friends still wrote tactile. Even though they can use apps and stuff, there was a community there. I was like, man, if there's a way to have a community-based thing for creatives, I'll do it. Didn't work out the way I did it. Supply chains dried up. It happens, but I love the brand so much. And so for me, being from New York, I don't know if you can see this. Go Mets in the corner of my Mets poster. You can tell. It's like New York was called New Amsterdam with an N, but there's a hunt for knowledge, a little bit like a Renaissance type deal with KNEW. So I kind of combined them both.
Love
That's
it.
awesome.
Love it. Well, thank you again, Flobo. You've been great. Have a
Thank
great
you.
night.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, so fun. I love this energy.
Delightful. I know.
So everyone, can you put the link back up, Kels? So his Patreon's down below, Flobo Voice, patreon.com/Flobo Voice. And he mentioned at the beginning, his Patreon's where you can see the full video of the podcast. And then on any podcasting platforms, you can find the audio version, which I think is smart to do it that way. So that's a good tip.
Smart, yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight. This has been such a fun show, and thanks for being here in the comments. We will see you on next week's episode of StreamYard Spotlight. Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
great night. Bye.